top technician and YouTube blogger, which gives him a right to live stream our stuff, basically meetup to meetup. So usually we gather around here in Korea, where we have nice lights, nice stage, and most important, a nice wired internet connection. Don't try Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi doesn't really work. But we always have live stream, which means that other people can join in. So if you have colleagues who couldn't attend, you can send them a link. Link is intentionally not there because nobody will type it anyway. Just Google for React Amsterdam YouTube and you'll always find it. And that means also that all the recordings are always available straight away. So if you missed some talk while you've been in a bar or something, you can always like rewind on the live stream pretty much straight away and share it with your friends tomorrow as well. The venue here is possible thanks to our supporters. So one of the supporters is our own company, providing some time and some extra budget for drinks at the bar. By the way, if you miss the signs, and there might be still some budget left, so after the main talks section, you can ask at the bar for free drinks and mention that you're from Meetup. So hopefully they still have some budget. We reserved like 350 euros for that. So thanks for our supporters for allowing us to get good venue and live stream and some food and things like that. The food was pretty much out, so I hope you enjoyed it. Next to Focus Reactive, also the React Amsterdam conference is basically supporting this meetup and helps us going because it's really challenging to keep the meetup going. I think it's already 50 year or like 4.5 years we're doing React Amsterdam meetup, which is pretty big for a meetup as people usually burn out and stop it. You can see pretty much a lot of different meetups on meetup.com who are not that active anymore. It's not good or bad, but it's just hard to keep going. Gladly, React Amsterdam conference helps us keeping this connection and motivate us building the community more. The most important recent announcement about React Amsterdam conference is that it is being renamed to React Summit. So as I mentioned, we're running it for 4 and something years, and React Summit will be a 5th anniversary already in 2020. So basically, it will be a pretty big thing. And I've been telling the story in more details on the last meetup in August, but here's the first ever React Amsterdam conference, happened in 2016. So it had around 250 people tops. So we rented like a garage space near the I River. So it was really underground. React wasn't a thing, so we needed to hide from Angular people to... I'm joking. But it was basically a garage. It's called Plek. And next year, when React hyped more and we didn't need to hide from anybody else, we rented a bigger garage, which already got just above 1,000 people already in just a year after the first edition, which is pretty nice. And we're still in that place. It's called Kromhout. It's also, the history behind it is really nice. It's an old ship engine factory. So it's kind of all like engineering driven and things like that. So it's pretty nice there if you haven't attended yet. So yeah, as I mentioned, next year, 2020, we'll have our 5th edition. We'll have like birthday cakes and things like that. We also dedicated to invite all the previous speakers of the last 4 editions to attend the conference for free. Well, we don't pay for their accommodation, but they can come and without any tickets. So hopefully we'll get as much past speakers from last editions. And for 2020, we already confirmed a bunch. So we usually invite some speakers individually, the people we know. And then we have CFP as well to fill the other half of the lineup. So we have quite some people. Kent Dots was with us last year with the Washhouse. It's really hard to get him over the ocean from US as he's not traveling often. Sarah, probably you all heard about her. Anna been a few times on our conferences, and 3 new joiners to our speakers family. Probably saw them as well. Yves is just a genius person from Netherlands. He recently moved to Amsterdam. So if you'll meet him in the meetups, just say hi. He's been looking for new contacts. He's doing Code Sandbox. You probably heard about that as well. And Uri, he also recently moved to Amsterdam, and he actually started GraphQL Meetup just like recently. So I think it's in early November. We'll have a first GraphQL Meetup. since a while in Amsterdam. So if you're into GraphQL, want to learn it, or you're using it, please do attend his meetup, because he's also doing a lot of open source on GraphQL, so it's super relevant, and we're helping them to make it happen. We also help out React Native group, so there's also React Native Amsterdam group right now getting second life after we had some break with it. We have a tradition since a while. We've been launching batches of tickets exactly at our meetups. So in August, we had like a hidden batch only for meetup visitors, just 20 tickets. So that batch is long ago sold out. And today, we basically earlier this week announced the time when we launch early bird tickets. And from right now, basically from 7 p.m., we opened that up. So right after the stage, I'll be checking how it goes. But last time, it's all early bird tickets, around like 100 tickets, been sold out in 24 hours. So by 6 p.m., 7 p.m. Tomorrow, it likely will be gone. It's just statistics, so no marketing bullshit here. Yeah, so since a while we grew. We've been biggest React conference since maybe even second year, because the React been just growing, and we just been holding this title for a while, and that's why we also moved to React Summit name actually. And just to share some vibes with you, I'll hope that video will be able to play. I pre-cached it and so on. So I'll just play this video, which will, no, I won't play it like this. I need to move it. Almost, yeah. It's a short one, but you just need to feel the vibes if you haven't been. Oh, by the way, who been on the React conference before? Quite some. That's nice. And for all the rest of people, let's play this up. Hopefully. Oh no, wait a sec. I need to do this. It'll be fine. It should have played actually. It's offline. Not that offline first. All right, we even have some music here. So I may comment a bit on the site. We have ships. So we have like, we rent out ferries that go straight to the conference. And we have speaker ship where we raise flag every year and have dinner there. And it's a boat hotel. So speakers actually stay on the ship. So it's really like sheepy. We ship stuff. We ship stuff a lot in React Amsterdam.
It's pretty amazing. The location is amazing. The venue is always amazing. The people are amazing. I'm amazing. No, I'm kidding. It's great overall. Yeah.
All right, so I won't be playing this till the end, I guess. So I hope you saw a bunch of familiar faces. Here's can see those as well. So yeah, if you missed it, and if you want to get there, early bird tickets will be live since now till end of tomorrow. So please do visit us. So the presentation stopped working. And besides React Amsterdam conference, as I mentioned, we run Amsterdam JS Meetup, and which is also a community foundation for GitNation conference. So we run two conferences in Amsterdam, 2 months apart. And GitNation is also a pretty big one. We're scaling it twice. The last 2 editions been in the church. We had Douglas Crockford, Kyle Simpson last year. This year we also have a bunch of speakers. This is an old screenshot, but we have a few more on the website if you go to gitnation.com. So the main motto of the conference is to invite OS core authors like Sarah, you pretty definitely know her. She's into Vue.js a lot. Matteo, he's a Node.js Foundation committee in the committee group, so he's been in Node.js like since the beginning. And Tobias, he's actually the author of Webpack, so not Sean Larkin, who is more visible, but Tobias is doing the most of hard work. So if you haven't knew that and you want to meet him in person, please consider it as well. And that's it with the announcements. We'll continue with 3 talks, as I mentioned. We won't have breaks. So the first speaker will be Alexander. You can slowly start getting on a stage, connecting to your laptop, which will hopefully work from the very start. And yeah, I had a brief chat with Alexander as well. He's also really new to Amsterdam, which is also really exciting to see. Not only Meetup get new members all the time, but also Amsterdam is growing like crazy. And it's great to have new people also going straight on the stage. Like it's your first Meetup, right? And in Amsterdam, yes. And yeah, you're straight on stage. So big respect for you. All right, and giving word to Alexander, let's give him some hands and
And now? Yeah. Cool. Nice to meet you all. Nice to see you. And before I will start, I want to build some personal empathy with you. I will present myself, quickly introduce. When I was a kid, I've been sitting on a chair and I tried to open a can with a fork. I wasn't really successful, and my father entered the room and said, like, "What are you doing, my son?" And I said, "I'm trying to open a can." He said, "There is a special tool for this," but because like I was a teenager, so I was kind of protesting against the system, I said, "No, I'm going to open it with a fork." I spent some time, I opened it. I returned to my father and thought, okay, I opened the can. He said, "But still, it would be more efficient to open a can with a tool." I said, "No, I'll learn how to open those cans with a fork more efficient than you do it with a tool." So I grew up, I learned JavaScript, I found like-minded people, and I do really inappropriate stuff with JavaScript, like doing backends, mobile applications with JavaScript also, but of course React. And today I'm going to share experience about me using Context API in various projects and in 2 companies, more or less successfully. And for the most important part of it, I'm going to share what was wrong and what you should pay attention for. In the first place, I want to highlight that probably we have a wrong understanding of the question. I often hear a question how we should replace Redux or MobX, how it could solve the issues of Redux and MobX. And to be honest, I think it's the wrong question, and we should ask something different. As a developer, I just want to manage data in my application. I don't really care how is it called, how it works under the hood. I want to get my job done, and if state management works good, it means that I shouldn't know about it. So it was the task I wanted to solve, and now I'll try to bring us back and talk why we all need all the state management systems at all. So I'm not really good in visualizations, so let's imagine that all those rectangles are going to be components, because there are going to be a lot of them. One of the problems why we had to use state in React, not a library, because you have a component, you have another component, which don't really access properties of your parent component. Like, let's imagine that parent component has callback and property, whatever. Another component inside it, which also not really related to state, we have there another component, which also just wrapper does some kind of job, and one small little motherfucker which wants to access the value in the top state of our application. And it's good if it's located like on the top state, but sometimes it might be located here, and there might be a couple of parallel trees, and those values aren't connected in any way. So we decided, okay, we can put everything in the roots, like the same like we would put in just in the window, but in the more beautiful ways. Another problem, yeah, and we also need to change these values, so it makes it even more interesting. Another problem, let's imagine the same kind of components, another components, and okay, we agreed that we are going to penetrate those props from the top to the bottom, another components, and I can push to the array, and nothing in my application will know that I actually changed this array, and those components are not going to be rendered. So another problem was that we tried to hack the React rendering mechanisms and find out how we can actually make sure that data we update is actually reflected in our application. And the third problem, like, there is no even reason to show you a tree of components. When our application grows and you have some big components for a couple hundred properties, like, what the hell, why do we need so? So there was such thing, which is called Context API. It was in React almost since the beginning, but I didn't know about it before the new version was released, and I was like, oh, it actually was somewhere in React, and I didn't know. And I was lucky enough to work on a project which was big enough and had some separate modules, like kind of separate applications. And so one of the applications was just kind of admin panel where people from our customer side were able to go and configure some stuff in database, do reporting and exports. So me and a couple of our colleagues decided to, okay, let's try this stuff with Context API and see what we can do, because risk was extremely small. Also, there are a couple of libraries you probably know about which actually work on top of Context API, one of Formic. Please raise your hands who actually use Formic in your project. Please keep your hands up who know how it works under the hood. Okay, today you will understand. And it's another library, Redux table. I get to know it by coincidence and wouldn't ever recommend it to anyone, just avoid it. I mean, those are not all libraries, for sure there are more, but I just mentioned those I know. And what I also want you to think about, that you shouldn't be an extremist in development, and you might try technologies by baby steps. And if you think about adoption of Context API, probably you can just create some components and dedicate some piece of functionality to be your room for experiments. Like you're already probably using libraries which do context, why shouldn't you try? So, okay, now it's going to be slightly harder. Please raise your hands who already worked with Context API and know what I'm going to talk about. Oh, that's cool, that's cool. It will be easier. Idea is actually almost the same. We have state somewhere. It is not kind of a component by idea, but actually it can be a component. And you have some portals from these levels which we were talking about. Oh, no. Sorry, I added those animations. So yes, so you can make a portal from here, skipping all those levels of nesting. So if we come back to the diagram, you can see that, okay, there is some components, and there is provider. Provider is something, well, let's not go deep into details, just something, which has access to data structure. It might be primitive, it might be object, it might be array, whatever. And we have some consumers. Those consumers are actually higher order components which allow you to pass the properties to components which actually rely on the data from the context. For us, it just looks like there are some components, wrappers, which connect us to the context. Something similar to what we have in Redux, like maps to state to props or something like this. Now I want to show you a demo. There will be a lot of code, and I hope I won't lose you during this coding session. First of all, please tell me if you can see the code on the screen and if I should make it white. Okay, so let's start from the very beginning. I won't just type a lot of code. I created a couple of branches, so we'll just navigate through example to example. It's actually what you've seen on the diagram before. There is a context provider. It's just a part of React context. So let's assume that we have also some application. Everything what you can see here is just basic bundle built with create React application without any additional libraries installed. So it's just bare bone React app. And I create a context. It's just a method of React. I can define some default state. And I create provider. Provider is just some generic wrapper which allows us to store this context somewhere into the DOM tree. And not actually DOM tree, but React DOM tree. And pass it to consumers which are located inside it. So for now, I hope it's easy. And if you'll try to launch the application, we will see how it works. Because I'm pre-testing, I will use Internet Explorer on Mac. And you can see that, okay, it's actually working. Let's go to the next step. Let's make it more complicated. And why actually I want to make it more complicated, because in real life, you are not likely to want to store all the data into the same piece of the state. So if you have a couple of contexts, I created, okay, I want to say hello from Amsterdam. And I created a context which has message and the context which has city. So pretty much the same what we've seen before, but I just have to nest consumers one into another because they return functions. I couldn't use recompose for it, and I have to do all this terrible stuff. And well, it's not really cool. And in real application, even in small one, we ended up having 7 contexts, which was really terrible to nest. And you have also probably don't want to have all pieces of the state in each component, so you always need to identify what you need in which places. And I really like the library which is called Recompose, and we decided to try something like building Recompose for contexts. And I made a really simplified version of what you can do here. And step 3 is a fake. So let's go straight to the step 4. And actually, what is happening here is just a reducer which wraps one component into another. So you can pass a lot of components, and it will just go one by one and make them nested one into another. Let's not talk about how we handle errors, where the error boundaries are going to be. You can handle it all if you write more code here. But the idea is that actually I want to put those components one into another. And in the end of the day, there might be some component which I want to pass state in, and the component which I'm wrapping. So there is message component which receive messages and cities. One of the problems you have to solve, probably you want to have named properties, and it's not probably that obvious from the very beginning why I'm using strings here. Because by default, we don't have named property when we have context, so you can actually use something like this or any other structure. I decided to have something like tuples and just used variable for state name. So in the end of the day, we have components which can receive variables which are equal to this stuff. If anyone will want to see the codes, I will share the link to repository. It's published in GitHub, so you can play with it afterwards. What's also interesting that since the last example, I have added display name. And sometimes people ask me how to debug the context API and how it's actually going to look like in debugger. And now we are going to switch from beautiful browser to normal browser, and let's go to component tree. Before we do so, let me come back to the piece of code we had before. And when we haven't got all those display name properties, and when you try to use your React debugger, you can see, okay, I have some provider, I have some consumer, but it just calls context. So one provider, one consumer. Yes, I have to update the page. So yep, so there is a provider, another provider. It's when you have many of them and they are nested hardly, it's hard to identify where is all happening. And of course, you can go provider by provider, see like what the value is in there, but still it's not really as convenient as you might expect it to be. So it's default feature of React context. You can just add display name, and if I will try to switch to the branch we were a couple of seconds ago, you can see that, okay. Now context is named, and when I'm trying to navigate over the tree of components, I can just see, okay, there is a context, okay, what it holds inside, okay, it holds what I want to see. So it really makes process of debugging easier and more predictable, and I really recommend to do so. So let's go back to presentation and just to see what we've done, but in more visual way. So just imagine that we have trees and berries in the forest, and we want to wrap them and pass the value to one single component. So at the end of the day, we'll have like one consumer, another consumer, and components. And by automating this nesting, we can save a lot of code. There are also problems about the problem which we always have, and the problem of Redux in particular, that state isn't actually as responsive as we want it to be. And it's also applicable to context API, and you need to think what you can do with it. And now let's talk a little bit about problems with rendering mechanisms. It's pretty basic stuff. It's not something what works only for context API or for Redux or whatever. It's just how React works under the hood. We should separate what we define as re-rendering, because sometimes people just think of repainting and they think, okay, there is a ritual DOM and it kind of covers my back, but unfortunately it's not. And sometimes you might have complex calculations inside your component which are executed before rendering. Just simple example, we might think of selectors are going to be executed every time the component is entered into its render method. So what we want to do, we want React not to go into onto this stage and compare DOM with DOM, but we want to compare properties one with another and make sure that we are not going to render the component again. So in order to find this performance degradation, I will show you another example. And what we are going to try to do now is that we'll try to have some higher order components which will hold properties and notify children components, past children components only if they changed. So we'll talk about memorization, and now we are going to talk about hooks and why all this context stuff finally makes sense for people. So let's come back to the code. So let's go to the step 5. Since previous step we made it easier to read again, I removed the second context because we don't really care about it anymore. And I switched to React hooks. And in particular, React hooks add a lot of value for context API because you don't have to do all this wrapping stuff anymore. And you can just define contexts as hooks in your functional components, and you can have as many contexts as you want, so there is no such limitation as you had property of context type for your classes. Now it's way easier to use, and you see that actually it reduces a lot of code. And if I will try to do like add additional context here, I just can copy paste, make new variables, and it's there. Let's come back to our performance issue and go and see what problem we might encounter. So first of all, of course, I need to okay. Okay. Oh, actually, it is here. Sorry. So something had to go wrong. Something had to go wrong. Yeah. Because I changed the file, I never saved it, so it wasn't updated. So what I've done here, we have provider, we have some message components, and I'll try to illustrate the issue I'm talking about. So there is a message component which receives properties, and I added unchanged method which allows us to change data into the context. And it also raises really interesting points and question how we are going to update the values, because if you try to have an object, it's kind of stateless, and you have to store the reference to the value you want to change somewhere. You might use functions, you might do some meta programming, but having a component, just simple functional components, is way easier. And it's way easier also because of hooks. If you ever use state hook, it's a hook which returns you two values, array of two values. First is actually variable, and the second is the method to update the variable. And from this moment, this function has a side effect which is going to persist the state of this function. So if you change something, it's going to come here again, and this use state remembers what has happened. And we just pass those values like value and function to change the value as our state, as a piece of our context, and just to check if it works. So I can type something here, and you can see that it works. But in reality, it's not that simple, and sometimes we might have more nested structure, and something what I've been talking about before. We have some the same app context provider. I added two additional variable and two additional variables to read this value and update it. I added new city, and yep, I passed them into provider. The same as we had before, but I also added a component which receives context as the property and tries to render the message. So we have like message components, and we have another message component. So message component remains almost the same. We use the state, we connect it using hook. And another message, which all has context as a property, but it also might be a hook here. And it renders the value which we are not going to change. So it's value which we would never change. We don't have any possibility to change it in our UI. And to make it more interesting, I just added a small function which will try to calculate Fibonacci numbers without memorization. So it's going to be freaking one, and like 40 milliseconds, reaching like 40th elements in Fibonacci array is going to be, sequence is already going to be quite time consuming. So let's see how it works. Let's refresh it. Oh yeah, for sure, I killed Yaron. Something always goes wrong, so sorry. So yeah, hello Amsterdam by Wrocław, the city I lived before. And now I'll try to change the string. And so I already pressed the button, but nothing actually happening. And okay, let's try and go to performance and measure and see what is actually happening. So I'll press record button, and at this moment I pressed button. I pressed it a couple more times. And yeah, we are just waiting. So it taken about 9 seconds for me to remove a couple of symbols, and you can actually see that function call takes about 1.5 seconds for each particular execution. So for each symbol, it taken for me 1.5 seconds to remove a symbol, and it also queued in the line. So yeah, it's quite time consuming. And actually, this label consumes the time, not the one which we are trying to update. And we don't want to have this stuff rendered. And from our rendering perspective, it doesn't really change anything, because if I'll try to paint flashing and I'll try to update something, and say remove the symbol, and it's going to be removed now, you see that's okay, this stuff is not updated. And it's actually the problem we have, that we enter the rendering methods, but we don't render because of virtual DOM. But we don't want to enter rendering method at all, as I mentioned in the very beginning. So what we can do, we can use another hook. It's not mandatory solution you need hook for, but hooks are extremely convenient for this. And instead of just having this kind of wrapped component, which is going to be executed every time, every particular time context gets changed, it's going to be executed. So instead of this, we will just memorize this value, let's return this stuff, and we will re-render the components. We'll go in there only in case when our other message has been changed. So it's going to compare string to string, and only if the string has changed, we will enter this rendering method. So let's save it and see what has changed. I'll try to record the performance again, and let me type. And you can see that now it becomes way more responsive. And so I try to stop. And you can see, okay, like those changes aren't even noticeable. So it's taken us once 1.5 seconds to render it, and afterwards we never entered it because the values we are using there never changed. So be careful, because this stuff compares values by reference. If you try to pass array, you have to recreate array each time, like you do it with Redux, for example. But if you are using mutations, there is nothing bad in mutations. But if you are using mutations, then it makes sense to use custom hooks. There are a couple of libraries already which allow you to rely on comparison, value by value comparison instead of link to link comparison. So if you have array, there are hooks which can iterate and go over the array and tell you if, not tell you, but executes when values in array or in objects are different. So let's come back to the code, to presentation, and just see what we've done. So again, we had high order components which we created. We memorized the parameters in there, and we rendered the new components only when we need it. And it's not something that you have to write every time. You can create your own high order component which will receive property it wants to listen to and just a shield, and it's going to work pretty good. So properties are equal, nothing happens. The good question you might ask me is how you can test it. And there are not much things I would recommend you, because actually you can test it as any other component. Unfortunately, you have to bring new dependency in your project, most likely, because if you want to test hook, there is a good library for it. It's called React Testing Library. It allows you some helpers to test hooks and to understand that, okay, those functions aren't pure functions anymore. They have side effects. They are stateful functions since the moment when you use hooks. And you can also encapsulate validations, all the logic into separate functional helpers, into separate files, test them as functions with any tool, and just keep as less logic in your components as possible. So actually, what I want to say in the end of this talk, that there is nothing bad with Redux. There is nothing bad with context without hooks. There is nothing bad with context or hooks without context. Redux with hook and context is also fine. Hook with context are okay. And I mean, any technology which is supported properly and has enough community really deserves its place and stays there for a reason. I'm not trying to tell you that you might want to use your context API and come to work tomorrow and okay, guys, we need to get rid of this shit and we want to write totally new application from scratch, even though we are all here like to do so. Like even 5 years ago, nobody of us probably had project in React, but it's not something that I want to encourage you to do. Be reasonable, try on smaller scales, see if it works for you, and peace. Feel free to reach me. Any questions, I'm staying till the end of the day, and probably I might be helpful for you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Alexander. Really great talk, really enjoyed it. Especially the summary is really good because people are afraid when they hear new stuff, they always like, oh, I'm not cutting edge anymore, I need to switch. What's hot right now? Svelte, I need to switch to Svelte. Like, no, you don't need to do it. So a good summary, really, really great talk. So now we'll be switching for the next talk. You can pass the mic to Michael. And Damian will be our next speaker. He's also new to this Meetup group, which is also nice. And he's from Rotterdam, and he's also a designer. So he just said to me before coming on a stage that some while ago he just swore not to code anymore. I don't know why. Maybe he will tell us why. But now he's building design systems, and he's a designer. So he's probably just doing everything. Not trusting the developers, maybe, but it's a good thing. So it's really good when people look broader and developers design and designers develop and so on. And until he's getting prepared, I see some people are standing, but there are quite some seats here. So if you have back on a seat, please put it down. I see 3 seats here, 3 seats there. So yeah, don't be shy. We have time. It's better if you're seating. We want everybody to feel comfortable. There's 1 seat over there as well in the middle. So if you don't mind standing, keep going. One more there.
Is it okay for the sound?
But yeah, sitting is always more comfortable. What do you mean? Ah, sorry. Yeah, let me move it a bit. It's better. It's good. All right.
Okay, guys, I almost forgot. I always forget something, but it's really important. Next week, like exactly in a week, on Thursday, in my beautiful company, we're organizing another event about also JavaScript and React-like stuff. And we are going to talk about progressive web apps, React Native, and how we got rid of QAs and started writing a lot of tests. So probably it might be interesting for you, and everyone is welcome.
Oh, you need to switch. All right, so less preparations. And by the way, if you're doing meetups, so Alexander just asked me if it's okay to mention that meetup. It's okay. It's always okay. Like if you're doing meetups, we definitely support that. As I mentioned, it's hard to do. It takes dedication, and doing talks is really hard. So all the support we can provide, we always be happy to do it. And yeah, I think Damian will be ready in a second.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the slides to be.
All right, and yeah, we're continuing with the second talk. Please welcome Damian.
My slide decided to disappear. Let's see. Yes, amazing. And still painful for your eyes. So I will speak at the same time while I'm trying to fix this. Amazing changes. But yeah, like I'm Damien, as you understood that. I'm a designer. Just quick story on that. Like if I decided at one point to stop doing engineering, it's because I care about something called HTML and CSS. And unfortunately in our industry, not a lot of people are caring about that. So was part of a lot of my frustrations for a lot of time. And that's why I decided that design was an amazing thing to do. And then I worked with designers. And I was like, maybe not so bad. So that's how I end up working on design system and accessibility. And it's great, like its name, let's create a good testing strategy. But in fact, it's a revamp of a talk that I've done in the past called The Good, the Bad, and especially the Frustrated Unicorn. First, because there is never enough unicorns in life. Also because as a queer person, I have to like unicorns. It's part of the contract. And because it's matching quite well with accessibility. Because like finding accessible website is like looking for unicorns. You will never find one. So if I like to discuss this topic, it's because when I'm asking people, usually in conferences, do you want to make accessible websites? Are you interested about that? People are always like, yes, of course. Like there is nobody that wants, there is some people. But not everybody wants to exclude people just by default. But when I'm asking people after, okay, great, you want to make accessible websites. Why are we still having this existing? So it's an image explaining to people that if you want to enter this location with a wheelchair, we kindly ask you to ask at the counter for the ramp. There is an issue somewhere. The intent is there. It's kind of amazing, but yeah, like you have to ask. Great. And we're doing the same with all our web experiences. So basically, we're doing the same with design systems. We're having like a lot of information. We're having a lot of component. We're playing with a lot of information. And usually, even when it's existing, like for example, color contrasts, people are not using it. So that's why I'm here. Hi, I'm Damien. So I'm a queer designer who codes. That's the last tentative that I had to explain what I'm doing with my days. But basically, I'm trying to make accessibility accessible, and that's really hard work. So I'm working for Castor in Amsterdam as doing things with design system, and we're hiring. So if you're liking HTML, CSS, and doing accessibility, like I'm really looking forward to discuss with you. And my pronouns are they, them for future purpose. And one last thing before, I'm sorry, I'm really bad with timing either way, so I will try to fit in 30 minutes. But first, just a really quick disclaimer. Please don't be this guy. It's not only about the asking awkward question after the talks to people, because don't just ask awkward question. And also, if you want to ask me questions, please feel free. I love questions. Just don't start with, I'm sorry, I will be this guy. True story. So when it's starting like this, usually I just don't want to answer. And this is related to the fact that I love to crush dreams. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about frustration. Let's talk about design systems and accessibility. With the first reality check, usually when you start like looking for design systems, you're finding this kind of bullshit. So this is like a real template that you can download for a design system in Sketch that will help you like design new products. And it's absolutely bullshit, because like you will never be able to use that in your product. First, because your design system needs to be tailored to your product, to your audience, but also to the goal that you're trying to achieve. And because like nothing is as cute as this. Like, I don't know like how it is at your work, but even with the best intent, like you will never make something as cute as this. So, crushing dreams. But also because if you want especially to make your design system accessible, you have to take care of something which is, and to take in consideration the fact that accessibility is complex. It is, and there is no way to make it simple. We can try to like ease the work on that. We can try to do the first 30%, and the first 30% is already like a huge improvement, because most of the web is not even doing this, but accessibility is complex. And it's complex because of one thing. There is no good answer. You can be inaccessible, and there is a lot of answers on how to be inaccessible. There is no good answer on how to be accessible. First, because it's 4 different axes. You can have like motor disability, you can have like hearing disabilities, you can have vision impairment, or you can have like cognition-related impairments. And just the last one, for example, between someone with autism, with ADHD, someone having a stroke, okay, not while having the stroke, but after a stroke, while recovering. All of this will impact differently your navigation, the way you're using the web. And in the end, like we cannot have solutions working for everybody. Good example, contrast. Having a good contrast is important, right? Like we're repeating this all the time. Contrast, 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 contrast. But if you're trying to make website for people with autism, for example, that's something that you have to be really careful with, because it can create the exact opposite effect. Less readable, and can trigger some really big annoyance for the users. So accessibility is complex. And even if a lot of time I can hear people saying that, yeah, but we have a design system. It will help us being more accessible. No, it will not. Like having a design system will not magically make your designs and make your code accessible. But it can help you make it at least making at least the work a bit less complex. But the thing is, a good code can't make a bad design accessible. If there is no good contrast, it will not be accessible. If like you have annoying buttons that are not visible as buttons, yeah, you can do a really good code. It will not be accessible. But for designers, the thing is, a good design cannot make a bad content accessible. If your content is shit, which is most of the time the case, you will not make the experience accessible because content is maybe the most important part of the accessibility, what you will bring as an information. And the thing is, even with really good content, shitty IDs are shitty IDs. And an ID which is excluding people will continue to exclude people. Uber is a shitty ID. Having an ID of bringing people, like taking people on like the corner of a street with someone that you don't know, in a car that you don't know, with the information of where you're living and what's your name, I'm sorry, but that's an ID of white dude. Because like you will not, as an LGBT person or a woman, want to go in a car of someone that you don't know having your address and your name. It's the same with accessibility. A lot of our IDs are just not caring at all about this element. We're just building things without caring about how people could use it. And how people could use and how people can use things is accessibility. So even with accessible components, you can easily mess everything. And I'm done with ranting. It was a big rant. It's maybe something I like to do the most in my life, but I need to stop at one point. But one last point. Stop considering that you can fix accessibility later. Fixing accessibility later, most of the time, means rebuilding everything. There is no quick fixes on something messy and shitty in your code. The only way, usually, is to rebuild it. Example with navigations. Amazing navigation, usually. Like, people goes in all direction. Yeah, why do I need div? Like, why do I need buttons? I can do div. Divs everywhere. And in the end, you have to rebuild everything because you have to use navs, you have to use button or link. You have to think about, in this case, how can you give the router to an external library? So rebuilding also the way your API for the design system is discussing with your product. So in the end, you're rebuilding everything. You lost your time. So stop considering fixing accessibility later. You have to fix it from start. So let's do a test. If you have on your products any user-generated content, even if you have like teammates trained on accessibility, if, let's say, people took care of the color palette, and you have assistive technologies, like you have people knowing how to use VoiceOver on your Mac, and you don't have stakeholders, because stakeholders are always a pain in the ass. So you don't have them, you don't have user-generated content, and you have everything else. Even with this amazing scenario, you're doomed. Definitely. But we have solutions. The first one is the fact that we can think about the accessibility in design system on a component level. And the first thing is it should be part of your definition of done. Like performance, accessibility have to be part of your definition of done. It's not, I need to ask more time to make it a bit accessible. I need to be sure that my PO understands that this is the estimation, but if I want to do the accessibility part, it will take one more day. No. That's part of the definition of done. A component not accessible is bullshit. So working at the component level can help you a lot to consider this and to make this as part of your job, especially with what we call the low-hanging fruit. So it's like this 30% that I told you about. And that's the most important step in accessibility, because this 30% will allow access to almost everybody. And the first question is, I love HTML. Are you using HTML? HTML is complex. Please learn HTML. The second one is, can you use your keyboard to navigate? And this one is always a complex one, because it seems really easy. I mean, you use a keyboard, tab, tab, tab. Is it working? Yay. Usually not, but still. But in fact, it's more complex because there is something we have to learn. It's using a keyboard is not just pressing tab. It's also learning when we're using what. Especially, for example, with assistive technologies like VoiceOver on Mac, opening a menu, it's not always enter. You can also use the VoiceOver command plus the arrow down, and it will open the information. The arrows can help you to navigate within the content. So you can do a lot by just doing tab and enter, but learning also how people will use the navigation with a keyboard is also really interesting. Marcy Sutton made an amazing plugin called One Day Without Mouse. And it's an NPM thing that you can install on your project, and one day a month, it's removing the mouse of everybody. No pointer event. Amazing. So I'm advising you to test it, because it's a good way to understand that your product is not usable, because your product is not usable. And also, what about the focus ring or the indicator? You know, like this ugly stuff that everybody loves to do, outline 0. You can do outline 0, but please do something else instead. And this is something low-hanging fruit. We have technologies now helping us. Focus Visible, for example, is a CSS selector helping people to only target and only display a focus ring for people using the keyboard navigation. The flaw is that no browser is supporting it, but it's existing, and there is a polyfill made by amazing people from the W3C. So there is a polyfill, you can use it. Do you have alternative content for rich media? I have the thing that everybody is like saying this since the early stages of the web, because that's one of the first rules that was part of HTML, and still we're not doing this. Accessible names behind this weird ID, it's like how a content will be named for people. It's not about the name attribute, but more about when it's not displayed, for example, the ARIA label and all this kind of information. And do you have enough contrast? Because contrast is still important, even if we have to be careful with it. The good thing is most of these tests can be automated with a small series of manual testing that can still be needed. And tools like, for example, AxeCore can help you achieving a series of automated testing without too much costs. AxeCore is used by a lot of plugins. You don't have to install AxeCore as part of your library. Usually, if you have just Axe, it's using AxeCore. If you are using Storybook, Storybook is having Axe within it. That's amazing. Storybook is already amazing from scratch, but it's even better when you're using this, because you can do accessibility testing right within it. It's doing it for you. And now it's smart enough that if you're changing props, it's redoing the test directly and giving you the new information. Use it. That's amazing. And it's so easy to implement part of your test. For example, this is like in the design system I'm working with, the 3 components that are, like the 3 tests that are part of all the tests described for components. One, which is like the silly one, like is it just not crashing? The second one, the snapshot test, because I love snapshots. And the last one, test alike, which is, in our case, just a wrapper for just Axe that we're using, but also using our theme provider. Because usually you can test a lot without theme in design system. But for the accessibility, if you don't have your theme part of the accessibility test, it means nothing. Because there is so much information depending on the colors that we will use, for example, or the size of some of the elements that you have to be testing, like to test your different component with this information. And I definitely need to go quicker on that. So, Snapshot, great way to mix both automated and manual testing. For example, what I love with Snapshot is the fact that React is an amazing tool. I hated it when I started. Now I cannot live without it. So I have a love-hate relationship to this language. And one of my main issues is the fact that we don't see HTML anymore, which is good because I can do real HTML without nobody complaining because it's hidden behind my style components. But it also means that I have no clear way to check what will be the rendered HTML, except snapshots. Usually in pull requests, people are just like, yeah, update the snapshots. But there is really valuable information. I can see that my list, UL, is having only li as children. It's really important. You cannot have anything between a UL and an li. You can see exactly what are the different elements. You can see if there is a label that you really need ever. You can see this kind of information, and that's the best way to see that. Automated and manual hand with hand. And you can also, I think really important on the component level, like trying to do tests for your own expectations. For example, I have a lot of expectation about my HTML. So usually I like to do this kind of test. It's a bit verbose, but when you have like a lot of people that will have to do the maintenance of it, that does not always have a strong opinion about HTML and understanding why some of the elements that will be displayed in the end as part of the HTML are important, setting some expectation on the fact that a number input required should be a type number. I mean, it should, but also to be required not to be disabled and not to have the attributes read-only because I just wanted to show like some not within it. It's important because that's the best way that you can maintain on the long run the accessibility of your components. And one of the biggest pain with all of that is the fact that if you're doing this right, it will still not be accessible because accessibility is about moving focus. It's about what's happening when you're moving the focus, but also moving the focus for people. And this also can be automated through the test. I will not go through the whole text, code of this test here, also because there is some shortcuts. But the idea is you can with Jest easily simulate anything. You can simulate the focus moving, some clicks, and one of the good things for components is the fact that usually, if you're working with enough granularity, you know what will happen. You know that when someone is clicking on the button opening a menu, that the focus will have to move to the first item in the menu. Because yes, the focus has to move to the first item in the menu, the first interactive item in the menu. And if it's done correctly with enough label, it will even give the name of the menu at the same time that it will read the name of the item. So all these kind of things can be tested and checked quite easily with Jest. And finally, let me present you a new best friend. You will love it because it's a really kind one, and it's all your it's in your favorite browser. And let's be clear, your favorite browser is Firefox because it's not a question. And Chrome is also having one, but Firefox is amazing. And this is the accessibility tab within your inspector. This accessibility tab, once you get a bit used to it, is providing you a lot of really interesting information. It's giving you the fact that, yeah, there is some names. Here I can see that my buttons are account or whatever. It can also give you issues, potential issues. Like the fact that, for example, this link is having an issue with the keyboard because I'm removing the outline on focus and I'm using the polyfill. But the polyfill is still a polyfill based on a class in JavaScript. So my browser is like, hey, maybe there is an issue over there. Great way to test. It's giving you information about contrast. It's giving you information about focus, giving you information about name. This is the best thing that happened to accessibility in this year. WCAG was last year, so let's say this year. And the main flaw with that is that we're discussing about components. And accessibility is not only about just the component itself. It's not just about having buttons and link using the good markup. Because when you have really amazingly designed and accessible components, but you don't think about the whole project, at one point you will have this. So you have this button opening a door, and it's quite nice. It's opening a door for you. You don't have to open it. And then you're in front of this issue. You have a staircase. And this example is amazing for me because it is accessible. The button is opening the door. And it's solving some accessibility problem. People that don't have enough force to open the door, especially in a heavy door that can stop fire, are helped with this. It's fulfilling a purpose. But the icon was still a wheelchair. And it's not really compatible. So you cannot think about accessibility only on the component level. You have to think it at a higher level. And because accessible component doesn't guarantee an interface to be accessible. It's about the global experience. It's about the details. It's about everything. Your content to the maximum, to the global experience of your page. And this about everything is important because you have to understand how people with assistive technologies will see your page. We have this image of people, for example, blind people that will use screen readers that will go through your content with tab, 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 tab. No, 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 and no, because we all have something else to do than pushing tab all day long. There is something called, for example, in VoiceOver, the web rotor. The web rotor is taking all your page and doing a list of your page. You can have the list of all the heading, the list of all the buttons, of all the images, all the content being listed. And that's why accessibility is about everything. Because you need to make sure that this list is bringing an information understandable at any moment. Then the title is understandable without its context. So people can directly reach it. And that the order is the good one. The order. And that's why you have to care a lot about details while focusing on the bigger picture. And as I said, user focus, but also providing the right order. This is especially important when you have to move the focus between components. Like for example, if you take again this navigation, opening a sub-menu, you will have to move the focus from two components that are not going together. The item from the navigation, the sub-menu. And I've seen a lot of solutions where, because the menu is not appearing as part of the DOM at the beginning, let's put it at the end of the DOM. It will be positioned absolute next to the icon. We're sure that it's working on mobile and on desktop. Hey, amazing, right? No, because you have to also understand that people need to find the content. You can move from one interactive element to the other with tab, but a lot of people are also moving from sentences to sentences. And if you want to go back to the menu with an element at the end of the DOM, it means that you were moved. Like, I'm taking you from your chair, and I'm moving your chair at the other side of the building, and you want to get back to this room. But the thing is, you were perched on the other side of the building. You don't know the route. You don't know how many events, how many elements will be on your way back here. So that's why you have to always stay as close as possible and moving the focus logically. So open it, going on the first interactive one, and when you close it, back on the button that open it. So what can you do? The first thing is automating a lot of this. Like you can automate DOM variations. For example, you can do magic. You can adapt the markup depending on the props that are provided. Like this. You know, buttons that can sometimes appear as link. You can manage to do that directly in the design system, and that should not be a burden for engineers. That should be a burden for the person that is coding it the first time, but never for all the other engineers using it after. So if you're like adding a target, which is a URL target, it's not a button anymore. It's a link. You have Anchor in the DOM. If you remove it, it's back as a button. Like this is the kind of things that you have to automate all the time. And we can also do a lot to teach people by forbidding actions. For example, in this case, you have a button, you want to add an icon, and at one point you will have the button without any text, and this amazing component will tell you, no, I don't want to, because if you just have an icon and there is no label for it, there is no content. Like, there is a button without any explanation. It's not visible for people using assistive technologies. This is not okay. So this is the kind of things. In fact, we're using TypeScript, so it's not displayed like this in the component. It's an error in your console, but that's the idea. And you should try to stay as close as possible from the current position, always. One of the interests of that is also that if you do local creation of DOM elements, the list stay like useful for people. They can still like also navigate quite easily, and you can rely not on the context of the element, but of the context within the list. So it can still make sense. And Xcore, one more time. We discussed it on a low level, but on a higher level, it's also really important because that's where you can see if all the different sections are matching correctly one with the other. Do you have more than one main section on your page, for example? Do you have like ARIA attributes that make sense on the level of the page? When you have like these dependencies between something being expanded and something controlling it, and you're using ARIA control, that's the kind of thing that you can only test if it's working or not on a really high level. And then, I will be able to accelerate a bit even more. Accessibility is a team effort. The first thing is you have to consider that HTML and CSS are real skills. Like it's something that people need to learn, and that's something that is way more complex than just understanding that there is elements. HTML is not only about the semantic of element, it's also about all the properties. It's about ARIA, it's about performance, it's about how the different things will interact together. Please learn HTML. And one more time, learning HTML doesn't need just knowing a list of elements. There are complex languages. And because of that, also as an organization, all our companies need to create an environment where people can learn more. If someone asks for a course when they can learn more about HTML, it's not a joke. It can be a real question, and it's valuable to learn more about HTML. I mean, prefetch for performance, it's HTML. HTML is way more important and way more strong than people want to believe it. Recruit a team of accessibility champions with members in all teams and all departments, not only engineering, because the sooner people discuss about accessibility in a project, the better it will be. So you can recruit a stormtrooper with like rainbow on them. You can recruit people from all the part of your company, but please like find people interested by this and like allow them to have time to learn about that and to also be able to share a lot of information about that. Because these evangelists are the people that will be able to not always do the accessibility, but just to help people finding solutions and to help raise when there is issues in project right from the beginning. Diversity is important. Accessibility is as important because share the love of that. Like it's the only way to bring people around the table and to make the web better. And all the tests that we saw, develop and document information about that. Because a lot of this focus movement, click on it, test about the label, you have to know how it works to be able to do the test. But at the same time, the test is most of the time, like a lot of time, what engineers will see when working on a component. The fact that these tests are already existing. And like taking advantage of that, when people will add a new test and documenting what's existing and explaining why we're doing this is really important also to share the love about accessibility. One more time. Sharing a lot about that. So you can do a lot about that. And one of the things is about the documentation in pull requests, for example, asking questions. When people are creating a pull request for a new component in the design system that I'm working on, the idea is they have to check some boxes. One of the boxes is, did you test your work with keyboard navigation? Hey, usually not. Usually it's a strong no, and just the fact that the question is asked push people to test. Did you test with an assistive technology? I worked on a new navigation system, and even if I love accessibility, I forgot. I did a pull request, and I forgot to test with my voiceover. And then I saw the checkbox, and I was like, oh, shit. Yeah, even myself. So did you run Accessibility Insight for the web? It's an amazing plugin using Xcore, but also more information about that. It's helping you to audit. It's not only just doing automating testing, but giving you information about what you should manually testing next to it. And was it successful? I mean, you can test it and being like, yeah, like, I don't care. No, was it successful? Is there any limitation? And a question that I have to ask also is, do you know where the device lab is? Because like, if you don't know where the device lab is, you were not able to test with devices from the device lab. And like, less truly one, but a good question that I'm asking at the end of the checklist is, and that I think is a good way to empower people, it's, do you believe that what you made is accessible? Do you believe that it's compliant with like the WCAG AA, for example, as a norm for accessibility? And I don't care if it's not. I just want people to, no, I care if it's not, but I just want people to feel empowered and be like, okay, I think I did what I had to do. And I'm confident with it. And I'm over time, but I will try to finish quickly. So you have to document to have people to also feel empowered and to know if they think they did a job that is accessible. And the issue is WCAG is not an accessible document. It's about accessibility, but it's everything except accessible. So it's definitely not readable. And it's not readable also because it needs to be legally applicable. So what you have to do most of the time is giving context-aware guidance to people. You have to start, for example, with an accessibility policy. It can be formal, but the idea of an accessibility policy is the fact that it can help you choosing goals. What are you trying to make make accessible on your product? What part? New designs, old designs, only a specific journey, like critical journeys? What? But also what's supported? What kind of browsers? What kind of assistive technologies? And what's not? It's okay to have limitations. If you have user-generated content, it's a pain. So like, it's okay to have limitation on that. You're doing your best. But just having a clear roadmap is always helpful. And it helps you to also understand when you will work on that, how you will test it, and what you have to test. So documentation. Let's talk about documentation. And this was a good example for me, because first I did it, and then because it's not only about colors. People can go on it, take some colors, click on the name, getting in the pasteboard, like that's amazing. But also it's explaining to people when to use which color. What is usable on white? What is not? And in a way that it's understandable for designers and engineers. Because engineers will not make design choices. But you are the people with a terminal complaining because the contrast is not sufficient. So you can also be there and say, hey, it's complaining. Can we use this gray? It's not a lot of difference, but it's accessible. Like, that's also the kind of thing that you have to feel empowered to do, because as engineers, you're designers. You are designers. You're designing code every day, and you are an important part of what will be delivered. So you also have to feel confident on the fact that if a designer says that it's not your job, that's an asshole. It's your job. And your documentation should also document the support and showcase the possible states, like this. A design is not just like an input. An input, it's a lot of variations. On focus, on hover and focus together. When it's read-only, when it's disabled. Because yes, HTML is amazing. Read-only and disabled, it's two different things having two different purposes. And it makes sense. Like search bar versus drop-down, like so many differences. This should also come from design. And you should always provide like product-specific guidance. I mean, Atlassian is amazing, providing like a lot of guidelines and a lot of information that I'm sure at Atlassian nobody's reading, because like this page is definitely way too long, but it's existing. But next to that, there is something we can do to make sure that people are reading it. And it's really when it's not overwhelming, so not like this. This was just one page. And so not like this, but also in a way that people can just get the good information while working on something. For example, about the context-aware, Salesforce is doing this. You're working on the form, like the information about the accessibility requirement, it's just on the top of it. It's in a box, you can see it, not the same design, and there is the minimum requirement that you have to know about it, about how it will work to make a description. If you have like a text next to the form label, doing more information next to the form label. So this is the kind of documentation that is way more efficient than just saying, like, this is the WCAG that we will try to do. And to end, and swear like it's the end, just a set of tools that you can use tomorrow in your project. The first one, snapshots. I told you, amazing. I love everything about it, but just not sufficient on its own. But Jest, like Jest is amazing. A lot of great libraries. Jest Axe, of course, I said Axe a lot, but Jest DOM. All the to have attributes, for example, to be visible. To be visible is an amazing one, because something non-displayed on the screen can be visible if it's visible to people with assistive technologies. So to be visible is a really good one. Like all of that is available through Jest DOM. And like use all of these into your unit testing environment so you can check also contradictory information. Because I was on product and project where people were like, okay, I have something, it's read-only and required. No, it's not. I mean, you can set read-only and required, but it's not, I assure you, you cannot be read-only and required. So this is the kind of thing that also we have to be careful with, because sometimes it's just two different people updating component at two different times and not removing information from previously. And your component in a design system should take care of that. If it's read-only, it cannot be required. So you're testing that it's expected not to be required. And like the last part of it, not disabled, not required, not invalid, because it's read-only. But with keeping in mind the fact that you can only catch 15 to 20% of accessibility issues. The rest, it's where you need experts. And accessibility inside for the web, next to just on your component, running it on critical journey, not your whole app. If you're doing an application, it's impossible to run it on an app entirely, but just on critical journey, really important. And working with atomic design principle. Atoms, molecule, organism, templates, pages, not only a language of designer, it's also helping you. Atoms are perfect for DOM-related tests. Everything that I show you about, like, can it be required and read-only? No, but that's the kind of thing that you can test. Molecules, amazing for accessibility test with Axe, because the molecule is where you will have the UL and the LI. If you're just doing on a list element test with Axe, it will complain because a list can only exist within a list container, like UL or OL. organism, perfect place to test how the focus is moving from one element to the other. Is it like working correctly? Templates, views, call this however you want, is a perfect place to just check the DOM order, section interactions. Is there a way that there is a clear difference between your main, your aside, like within your main, you have your aside, your sections, all this kind of information. And ensuring just, thanks to all of that, that it's part of your testing culture. And if you don't have a testing culture, which is an issue, it can also help you creating an extensive testing culture, which can help you on the long run. So in conclusion, it's fun as it's frustrating. And one of the things that I would advise you to do is starting with an accessibility policy to like offer ways to learn more through online courses, like DQ is doing an amazing one, to build a team of evangelists, to propose a documentation adapted to your product, and in the end, to develop a series of manual and automated tests. This could be your strategy to make a product more accessible. Thank you.
Great talk, like really conference level talk. Really enjoyed it. If you want to go and speak on a conference, maybe at React Summit as well, reach me or any other conference organizer. It's just really conference level talks. Much appreciated. So now we'll continue with third speaker. So while Gerrit is, oh, actually I need to, Michael, can you help that as well? Or maybe you can do it yourself. You're professional speaker now. Yeah, so a few small announcements. I asked at the bar, we still have budget. We actually use just half of it. So if you, after the third talk, you can still go at the bar, say you're from a meetup and get some free drinks, alcoholic or not, whatever you choose. The bad news is that the tickets for React Summit is running out. I've been just checking it and around 20% are sold out. So first thing in the morning, you know what to do. And our third speaker, is not new to Amsterdam. He's, I don't know, are you going to every meetup ever? Because I always remember seeing you around.
Definitely not all of them. I have other things to attend to, but yeah, a lot.
So Gerrit is experienced speaker, experienced open source author. He's also doing Storybook full-time.
Not me, the company I work for, but yeah. But I am involved with it on the side.
Yeah, so definitely great stuff. Like company like Chroma definitely helps open source moving forward, and Storybook is a great project. And without further ado, welcome Gerrit, our final speaker for today, talking about his library and open source learnings, which is always interesting because open source is good. You should do it. So welcome Gerrit.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so thank you. Yeah, I'm here to talk to you about kind of a difficult subject. When I submitted this talk, I was like, yeah, let's do something different for a change. I mean, I'm on stage frequently enough, but I usually talk about like technical subjects, React most of the time, React Async and promises and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, yeah, let's talk about all the failures that I had, like. Well, so this is my end of my talk. I never fail. No, just kidding. Bob Ross is famous for saying, like, we don't make mistakes, we make happy accidents. So let's stir it up a bit. So this is me. I'm Gert. I work for a company called Chroma. Like Robert said, Chroma is the company behind Storybook. So actually, I'm not the one to work on Storybook full time. I work on products related to Storybook, which use Storybook. But Norbert is also here in the audience who actually works on it full time. But I also have a side project. It's my own open source project. I started a little over a year ago. It actually originated from an app that I built in-house for Xebia, my former employer. So React Async is a library that helps you to build asynchronous UI components and do basically everything with promises in React and handle that in a really nice way that is idiomatic in the React ecosystem. I open sourced this in the summer of 2018, so a little over a year ago. Been working on that like for quite some time ever since. Used it in a couple projects that I was doing for customers, and it's going pretty well. So like I said, React Async, a little bit about it. This is not a talk about technical things about React Async, but it's built around promises. It handles things like all the states that promises can be in, so pending, fulfilled, and rejected states, so that you can, for example, implement your loading indicator in a loading states and such in proper ways. And it deals with like all the intricacies of the asynchronous lifecycle, where it can fail, for example, or if you trigger multiple promises in a quick succession. So you have a button, and every time you click it, an HTTP request fires off. Well, you will want probably to cancel the previous ones and abort the underlying HTTP request to avoid race conditions. So that's one of the things that React Async handles for you out of the box. And then you can have it, for example, start doing an HTTP request when a component renders. So when you mount a component, we'll fetch some data so that it can render, for example, or handle like user interactions, like submitting a form, for example. So this has been going for a little over a year, and it's actually doing pretty well. It's not big enough yet to my liking, but so I hope you will all start using it tomorrow or next week. But let's first talk about a little bit about the journey that I experienced over the past year. So I made a bunch of mistakes, and you'll probably all be kind of familiar with these things that they just happen. Everyone fucks up every now and then. So I do too. And one of those things that, for example, I did on more than one occasion is breaking a build. And that means not breaking my build, no, breaking someone else's build, because I published a version in a patch release, and people tend to depend on like a range of versions. So in Semver, where they're like, you have this tilde sign in your package.json, and that essentially means like, I only care about major and minor, but patch can be anything. So if I release a patch version and it's got a breaking change in there, and they depend on it, and it goes into their CI system is going to break. So this happens. I try to prevent that from happening. Obviously, I don't want that to happen, because I want the library to be reliable, and people should be able to rely on that it works properly always. But yeah, sometimes you still basically fuck up. But that's also because it can be fairly tricky, because a bug fix, which usually in Semver, like a bug fix is a patch release. When I fix a bug, and it's just a bug that I fixed, I'll release a patch release. If I have a new feature, I'll do a minor release. And if it's a breaking change, always, it's a major release. I just thought of that recently. It's like, we should not be celebrating major releases. We should only be celebrating minor releases, because minor releases, they bring new features. But major releases, that's always like a pain in the ass, because people are going to have to migrate their stuff and upgrade, because it's a breaking change. They have to upgrade, probably do some API stuff. I actually sometimes ship code mods to automate that change, but still, it's a pain. But also a bug fix may actually be oftentimes a breaking change, and that's one of the things that I've tripped over, is that something might seem like a simple bug fix, but there are so many side things that you have to consider, like the entire ecosystem within which your package lives, that it might still break in a certain scenario. I mean, people might rely on the fact that it was broken in the past, which obviously they shouldn't do that, but it still happens. Or I make a minor change in the API, and it's not breaking in JavaScript world, but it also means a change in the type definition in TypeScript. And people are relying on TypeScript, are using TypeScript. Then it will also break, because it won't compile anymore, for example. So that's one of those things that happens. So, okay, what can you do if you publish a broken release? Well, you can try to unpublish it on NPM. You can just do npm unpublish this package, this specific version. I want to unpublish it. But it's generally frowned upon. Actually, the NPM organization, they say like you should only do this really if you, for example, published secret information like credentials to, I don't know, your CI system. So, which is actually something I did. So there's actually like my the token that I use to deploy stuff on sites now, it's actually somewhere in GitHub. But yeah, the token is obviously revoked now. But yeah, I did that too. I accidentally published those credentials, so anyone could have uploaded websites on my account. But anyway, and that's fairly minor. But so the better way to do it is to deprecate it, right? So there's actually a couple of things. This is actually a true one. 7.0.0 is actually deprecated because I was like, yay, we have a major release now, and oh fuck, it's broken. Because it was actually around the time I was releasing version 7, we actually migrated from like just doing Babel, like Babel transpile and make a package and deploy that on, like publish that on npm. We moved to a thing called pack, and pack is a different way to package up your code basically, so that it will actually not ship only ES5 code, but also the original source code and ES modules code, because modern browsers support that, and you probably are using, like, consuming this inside Webpack, and in that case, your own Webpack can decide whether or not to transpile this library, so it can be optimized actually. So that's great. But anyway, and one thing I learned that, and I started doing that, but that's still not enough, is like working with release candidates. So essentially, release candidate is like, okay, I have done all this work and I want to go and release this now, but let's take a step back and do an alpha release. It's probably basically already done, or beta release, or RC release, whatever you want to call it, and release that, and then start using that particular version in various projects. Ask people to please, I fixed this bug for you in this particular release. Can you test it, please, in your application? So I started doing that, and sure, it takes a couple extra weeks before I can actually do the actual release of the real thing, but it saves me from having to circle back later on to fix the mistake that I might have made. So that's actually a pretty good strategy that I started to adopt. So mistake number 2 is forgetting about the integrations. So React Async is just one library, and React Async is just a cog in the wheel, right? It's a part of a bigger whole. You'll use it in your React application, but that might be a Create React application. Someone's own custom-built Webpack config might be there. They might be using Next.js or Gatsby or React Native. I've seen used like and TypeScript, and they might want to use it with Redux or MobX or React Router or Downshift, or React Table was one of those things that came up in the issue tracker. Like, you have to take care that that your library doesn't break in the bigger picture, right? So that's one of the things that I started to do. Another thing is testing against React itself, because I've been bitten before by the React team shipping a new version, and that might be a patch or a minor version, and it breaking React Async, because they too deprecate stuff, they change stuff. So what I'm actually doing in React Async is in CI, I run this thing called test compat, and it will actually test against version 16.3, which is the first version that we support of React and React DOM, and then run the same suite of tests, or actually a slightly different suite, but against the upcoming, so the next version of React. So that will probably be, I don't know, 16.10. Is that released already? I don't know. And then finally against the latest version of React, like the current stable version of it. And that way I can test for both backwards compatibility and forwards compatibility with React at least. So that's one of the things I do. And then on the other subject of all the other libraries in the ecosystem, I want to have examples for each of them. That's what, so in the repo for React Async, there's also a bunch of examples. These are not the whole list, This is just a subset of it. But I want to have examples for Next.js, for React Native, for React Router, for Suspense with TypeScript, all of those things. And then in CI, run all the tests for all of the examples against the version of React Async, which I'm about to release. So that's actually what I originally wasn't doing, and it's bitten me so often that I really want to automate this now. So it's automated now. So actually, I switched from Travis to Circle CI, and at that point in time, like, okay, let's do it properly now. So in Circle CI, it runs all the tests for all the examples and tries to build it, compile it, and actually, it's all of the examples are also automatically deployed to now, and so you can test it there as well. And all of this lives in a monorepo. So React Async is just one repository on GitHub, which contains the examples, but it also contains actually, at this point in time, 2 packages, React Async itself and React Async DevTools, which is a side package that I built for it. But that also means that you need a bunch of tooling around those monorepos. And you might be like, yeah, Yarn has workspaces, so we'll be good. No, you're not there yet. Then you might have heard of Lerna. Lerna does everything around monorepos, right? No, it sucks in certain areas. And so actually, this is the workflow that we have for React Async. So first of all, obviously, Yarn. We use Yarn. Yarn workspaces are great. Yarn is much better than NPM. So Yarn handles all the dependencies. When you install, like you do Yarn install or just Yarn in the root of the repository, it will install all of the dependency of the root, but also from all the sub-packages and all the places, all the workspaces, and do that handle that in a proper way. Then there's a thing called relative depths. Relative depths is not very well known. It's actually built by Michel Westraten, who also built Mobex. And it's actually kind of a replacement for symlinks. So you might have known Yarn Link or NPM Link, which creates symlinks so that it can actually, like, I have the library that I'm developing, and I have an example that depends on that. But when I update my code, I want this example to also use this newly updated code, right? I don't want that to stick to something that's on NPM. No, I want that to point to my local machine. So you can use symlinking for that, but then you're actually linking against the sources of your package and not what's actually going to be published on NPM. And that's also bitten me in the past a couple of times. So what actually relative depths does is it actually builds your library as if you're just about to publish it to NPM, and then basically copies the files on your file system from this place where it's built into the places where it's going to be used, and that's how it does it. So it actually copies this just into the node modules directory of each of the examples. So it's basically as if it was installed from NPM, but it's actually just a file watcher that does that all the time. Actually, that's the way you could configure it. And then Lerna runs all the tests and the build scripts in all the packages, so the library itself, but also the examples. It bumps the version number, so that's what I also use Lerna for, to bump version number in all of the packages. So they are actually all equal. So when I go React Async is now version 9.0.0, all the examples are also version 9.0.0. And then there's pkpack, which I mentioned briefly before, which handles the actually building and packing of the artifact that is going to be published on NPM. Pack is great because it automatically ships the TypeScript definitions for it. It automatically makes sure that you ship the modern ES7 code or ES 2019 code, I guess, beside the ES5 code. And then finally, I use NPM to actually publish the package. Mistake number 3, neglecting the types, as in the type system. Like it or not, but types are here to stay. So I actually am a JavaScript developer and not a TypeScript developer. I have not written much TypeScript so far, even for React Async. But I had to face reality. So when I built React Async, I built it in just JavaScript, modern syntax all over. But I had to face the reality that people wanted to use React Async in their TypeScript project. And that means that they want a good user experience, like the developer experience that they are used to. And that means that I'm going to have to ship type definitions for React Async. So the way to do that is you can just tack it on to your project, your JavaScript project, using a .d, like a .ts file. So it's a definition file, type definition file. And a lot of people use that. So that's the type definition file that I ship with React Async. And then there's also some people, it's getting less and less, who still care about the prop types. I personally don't give a about prop types. But still, they are both in the library, and like keeping them in sync with the actual source code, it's just a pain in the ass. It's it's not necessarily a lot of work, but it's work, right? So essentially, the way I handle it right now is if you open a pull request, I have a template, a pull request template that has just a checklist. Like, did you update the type definitions for TypeScript? Did you update the prop types? And you have to check them all. And that's the process that we have right now. So it's just annoying. So let's be honest, this is a wise thing to do. So this is actually currently in progress. We're migrating to TypeScript. And luckily, so far, I still have not written any TypeScript because I'm not doing it. So there's these two guys from Germany. And they were like, yeah, we had some Slack time at our company. And we were like, yeah, we use this and we love React Async. But we would like to see this being in TypeScript. I'm like, go for it. Do it, please. Open a pull request. So this has been obviously ongoing because it's quite a big project. Like, look at the changes and additions, whatever. They're rewriting the entire thing in TypeScript. But yeah, I'm turning it on. So actually, version 10, I plan that to be the TypeScript release. And hopefully, they just told me this morning that tomorrow they have another Slack time day at their company. So they're going to be working on it again. So maybe I'll help them out, and maybe next week, I don't know, we'll have something that we can actually release. Would be cool. So yeah, I'm giving it out of my hands, and I really love that because, but that's another subject. Mistake number 4, not writing about it. When you have an open source project and it's your baby, right? And you want it to grow and be popular and succeed and allow me to be on conferences, on stage and everything. It's kind of doing that, but not enough yet. Popularity, it comes not by having a great library in itself. Like, your code can be flawless and perfect and super nice and solve a lot of problems, but if people don't hear about it, they will not know about it and will not start using it. So one of the things that I have been doing is speaking at meetups and conferences, but yeah, I only this is quite a big meetup, so now I reach quite a few people. But yeah, that's not the big bang that you're looking for. So actually, what actually happened in August 2018, when I kind of released the first version of React Async, I wrote a blog post. Data loading with React Async. It's now more of a general thing. Like, at first it was mostly about doing HTTP requests and such. Now it's anything with promises. But this was in August 2018. And then so October 2019, I wrote another blog post saying, yeah, React Async version now is now released. Awesome. And I was really like kicking myself, like, why didn't I just write a blog post with every major release, at least every major release, right? And then so that you can actually build some traction. Like, the only thing I was just doing is shouting on Twitter, like, yeah, version 7 is now released. And yeah, I have, I guess, I don't know, 1,000 followers or something, so it's okay-ish. And Kenzie Dodds is actually promoting React Async because he's using it in his workshops. So that's great. So actually, I just tweet and I say @Kenzie and he retweets, and then I have a lot of fun. But it gets some traction. So you have to, I guess, know the right people. So, but still, like writing blog posts, that's one thing I learned from the Storybook community, actually. So I got kind of involved now with the Storybook thing, now that I work for Chroma. And I'm taking a lot of learnings from how Norbert and the rest of the team has handled Storybook, because Storybook was almost dead like 2 years ago or something, and now it's like the biggest project on GitHub. Like I think the third biggest one. But anyway, it's huge and it's great. But I learned a lot of things from that. Like, they're in top 100. Whatever. It's huge. It's great. It's top 3. Now, actually, I think it's number 3 on the list of TypeScript projects. What? Yeah, I looked it up recently. Anyway, anyway. I get a lot of ideas from that because like Norbert handles this project in a way like it's not my project. I just help people get started with it and help them contribute to it. So that's actually mistake number 5. I've been going at this for way too long just on my own, right? I started this project over a year ago, and it's been my project and only my project for a year. And going at it alone, it doesn't scale. Like if I want to take a break, or I don't know, we're gonna have another baby next month, or actually in December. So that's gonna be like a time when I definitely probably not gonna have time for React Async. It would be nice if other people would actually be continuing working on it. So going at it alone is not a great way. So this is actually what it looks like right now. It's like, so yeah, that doesn't work. So I'm really I want this to be a community project. So that's over the summer. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna stop working on the code itself. I'm gonna start working on the project instead. So I moved it from my personal GitHub account to an organization on GitHub. I created a documentation website with a domain name and all that stuff, and Twitter account, a Discord channel, and a whole bunch of stuff that you need when you want it to be a community project rather than just your personal project. I actually have funding for it now even. Coming back, by the way, to this thing over here, it's actually a bit, it's not true completely, because I have been using squash and merge on the project, which essentially means that all the commits become one commit. So actually this guy, this Phineas on the left, he has 2 commits. That's actually 2 pull requests, because there's 1 commit per pull request when it actually reaches master. And that's actually the master branch, I think. So that has to be released as well. So it's not really true, because I can commit directly to the branch, and all the others have to go through the pull request. So it's not really an honest picture. So actually as you can see in this picture, I just today changed that to create a merge commit. Let's go back to the basics, so that everyone will have like a fair amount of commits on the master branch in the history, right? Because this is just a bit unfair. Which actually, because I've been preferring squash and merge for like a couple of years, and just today I'm now convinced that like squash and merge, sure, it gives you a nice Git history, but it's way more important to give other people recognition for their work and having them in the statistics, and not lying about the history of the project, right? So one thing I did, I'm creating a bigger project out of this. It's called Async Library, named after React Testing Library, you might know it, or Testing Library by Kenzie Dodds. And Async Library is aimed to be bigger than just React Async. Actually, just yesterday I created Svelte Async. Saying, so you should be using Svelte. No, just kidding. As a prototype, because a former colleague, he was like, yeah, I want to do a Svelte version of this. And another one, yeah, I want to do a Vue version of this. Go for it. But obviously, I want to promote that and enable that. So the role that I'm taking in this is enabling that. I want people to start building an Angular version and a review version and a whatever version, and having integrations with MobX, Redux, and all those other things that you can possibly think of, Gatsby, GraphQL, whatever. But it should have a central place. So that's Async library. And it's looking for contributors. So if you're interested in doing open source and any kind of contribution is welcome, please join us. That would be really awesome. So in conclusion, lessons learned. Carefully consider the version numbering and use release candidates where it's appropriate. And then test for compatibility also against external libraries, not just your own code, but test for other, like how it communicates with other libraries. I learned that TypeScript is actually quite a natural choice for libraries because you're gonna have to maintain a type definition anyway, so you might just as well write it in TypeScript, even though I'm not a TypeScript fan. You have to write probably more content, so blog posts, articles, whatever, documentation, than you actually write code. So if you're not into marketing, maybe open source is not your... No, you can always contribute to open source. But someone's going to have to do still the marketing, which is like, I don't like it either. I'm not Kitsy with his awesome followers, or I don't know, whatever. But someone's still going to have to be on a stage and promote this stuff, and if you want it to be successful. And then finally, create a community and share the ownership. I don't want to take ownership over this. Actually, when I was sitting in the audience just now, I was like, maybe we should just go back to version 1.0 when I'm going to release it under the @async library namespace on NPM. We can just call it 1.0. Actually, I'm actually considering that. And then it's not my project, but it's actually the community's project. So maybe that's a good idea. So thanks for listening. This is me. You can follow me over there. And obviously, go check out React Async.
Great, thanks a lot, Gert. And Gert also missed his dance lesson today because of Meetup to share his knowledge. So we can give him one more applause for that.